In the turbulent landscape of 1930s Harlem, one name commanded respect, fear, and a complex form of loyalty: Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. A charismatic, ruthless, and highly intelligent crime boss, Bumpy was the undisputed godfather of Harlem, a man who navigated the perilous waters between organized crime and the black community he both exploited and protected. He was a Robin Hood figure to some, a vicious gangster to others, but universally known as a man not to be crossed. By his side was his wife, Mame Hatcher Johnson, a woman of strength and dignity who managed their home and family, a sanctuary from the violent streets Bumpy ruled. Their life, though built on illicit gains, was one of relative power and insulation within the vibrant, struggling world of Harlem. But that insulation was about to be violently ruptured by an external hatred more virulent than any gangland rivalry. Visuals. Archival footage of 1930s Harlem street scenes, jazz clubs, and crowded sidewalks. Contrast with footage of rural areas and Klan rallies. A dangerous gamble. Bumpy's dealings in the Deep South. Bumpy's empire, while centered in New York, had tendrils that reached into various enterprises. One of these was the numbers racket, an illegal lottery that was the lifeblood of many black communities. To expand, Bumpy made a fateful and incredibly dangerous decision. He began working with a white organized crime family from the South to distribute counterfeit money. This was not just a business risk, it was a mortal gamble. It meant venturing into the brutally segregated American South, a world governed by Jim Crow and dominated by the terror of the Ku Klux Klan. For a powerful black man from the North to engage in a deal that could potentially undermine local white criminals and law enforcement was seen as the ultimate affront. Bumpy, perhaps overconfident in his reputation and the sanctity of his criminal partnerships, had stepped into the lion's den. And the lions were waiting. Visuals. Grainy, sinister images of hooded Klansmen. A photo of a rural road. A close-up on a tense, worried face. The unthinkable crime. Mame's kidnapping. The retaliation was not a direct attack on Bumpy himself, nor a business move in the underworld. It was an act of pure, sadistic terror designed to humiliate and break him. In 1939, while Mame was traveling by car through the South, her vehicle was intercepted. She was forcibly taken, not by rival gangsters, but by members of the Ku Klux Klan. The message was clear and chilling: your northern power means nothing here. We do not fear you. We own everything, including your life and the life of your family. Mame Johnson, the wife of one of America's most formidable gangsters, was now a prisoner of the nation's most infamous hate group. The news, when it reached Bumpy in Harlem, ignited a fury colder and more calculated than any he had ever known. This was beyond business, it was a personal, racial, and profound violation. Visuals. A montage of Bumpy Johnson looking grim. Shots of tense phone calls, maps being studied, shadowy figures gathering. Day 1 to 2. The calm before the storm, Bumpy's calculated rage. Contrary to what his enemies might have expected, a loud, public, and reckless outburst, Bumpy's initial response was silent, stealthy, and terrifyingly efficient. He did not go to the police. In the segregated South, they were often Klan allies. He did not make grand threats in the press. Instead, he activated a network that blurred the lines between his criminal enterprise and a private army. He contacted every underworld connection he had, both black and white, including his Italian mafia associates like Lucky Luciano. The message was unambiguous. This was an attack on the sanctity of the criminal world itself. If a man's family was not off limits, then no one was safe. He leveraged his considerable financial resources, gathering intelligence, locating the specific Klan chapter responsible, and identifying its members. Meanwhile, Mame endured terror, held in a remote location, her captors likely smug in their belief that their robes and racial ideology made them untouchable. Visuals. Stylized, shadowy reenactment of figures moving through woods at night. Quick cuts of car headlights on dark roads. Day 3 to 4. The reckoning, an army descends. What happened next was a logistical and tactical shock that began to ripple through the underworld and the rural South. Bumpy did not send a small hit squad. He financed and orchestrated the descent of a small, well-armed private army into the heart of Klan territory. This force was a mix of his most loyal, hardened Harlem enforcers and hired mercenaries who understood guerrilla warfare. They moved with a precision that paramilitary groups would envy. Their mission was not to negotiate. It was to locate, isolate, and send a message so devastating it would echo for decades. One by one, in the dead of night, key members of the kidnapping Klan group began to vanish from their homes, from isolated roads, from their places of work. They were not simply killed. They were taken, just as Mame had been taken. Visuals. A darkened barn. A single light bulb swinging. Shadows on a wall. Day 5. The exchange. A message written in blood. The leader of the local Klan chapter received a communication. It contained a simple, brutal offer. The safe return of Mame Johnson, unharmed, in exchange for the return of his abducted men. The meeting point was set in a remote, neutral area. When the Klansmen arrived, the scene that greeted them was one of unadulterated horror. Their comrades were returned, but not as they were. They had been severely, systematically, and gruesomely tortured. The message was physical, visceral, and unambiguous. This was not just punishment for a kidnapping, it was a declaration that the Klan's monopoly on terror was over. That a black man from the North had not only matched their brutality but had exceeded it with a cold, professional efficiency that their hate-fueled mob violence could not comprehend. Mame was recovered, shaken but physically unharmed. The exchange was silent, tense, and marked not by a gunfight, but by the overwhelming psychological victory of absolute dread. Visuals. Headlines from black newspapers like the Chicago Defender and Pittsburgh Courier. Contrast with sparse, vague reports in mainstream Southern papers. Day 6 to 7. The shockwaves, a story suppressed yet ubiquitous. In the days that followed, America was shocked, but not through front-page headlines in major white newspapers. The official story was suppressed. Local Southern law enforcement had no interest in pursuing the case. To do so would mean admitting a black crime syndicate had thoroughly outmaneuvered and brutalized the Klan on their home soil. The national press, operating under their own biases and a lack of verifiable facts, largely ignored it. However, the story exploded like wildfire through the black community. It was carried in the influential black press, newspapers like the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier, and spread via word of mouth from Pullman porters on trains traveling north and south. In pool halls, barbershops, and kitchen tables across black America, the story was told in hushed, awestruck, and often triumphant tones. Bumpy Johnson got his wife back. He went down there and he beat the Klan at their own game. The shock was multifaceted. For the white underworld, it was a stark lesson in Bumpy's reach and ruthlessness. For the Klan, it was a humiliating blow to their myth of invincibility. They had been treated not as ideological warriors, but as amateur criminals who had broken a code and been professionally exterminated for it. For black America, living under the constant, grinding terror of lynching and Jim Crow, the story became a potent, if dark, folk legend. It was a rare narrative where the seemingly omnipotent force of white supremacist terror was not just challenged, but was decisively, violently, and perfectly defeated. It spoke to a deep, unspoken yearning for retribution and protection. Visuals. Photo of an older, contemplative Bumpy and Mame in later years. Modern footage of Harlem. Legacy. Myth, morality, and the complex truth. The story of the 7 days that shocked America lives in the space between verified history and powerful legend. Mame Johnson herself would confirm the kidnapping in her memoirs, but the precise, gruesome details of the retaliation remain part of oral history, amplified by shows like Godfather of Harlem. The moral landscape is profoundly gray. This was not a story of noble civil rights activists overcoming injustice through protest and law. This was raw, primal, eye-for-an-eye violence meted out by a criminal. Yet, in a time when the state offered no protection, and was often the perpetrator, the action of a feared gangster provided a perverse form of justice that resonated deeply with a persecuted population. The shock was not merely about violence, it was about a fundamental power reversal. For 7 days, the hierarchy of American racism was inverted. The hunter became the hunted. The perpetrators of terror learned its true meaning. Bumpy Johnson, for all his crimes, had done the unthinkable. He had made the Ku Klux Klan afraid. And in that specific, brutal context, for a people whose history was written in fear, that shockwave was felt as a tremor of power. It remains one of the most controversial, morally complex, and utterly compelling underworld tales in American history, a dark fable about the extremes one man would go to for his family, and the terrifying price of crossing him.